Hey everybody, welcome back to Module 4, and we are going to be talking about observation in a little bit more detail than we did last time. Everybody does observational research. It's people watching. We all do it. We're going to be talking basically about two kinds of observational research that you can do. And you can sort of think about some of the things we talked about in the ethics module when we talk about observational research, because it does come up periodically, especially with participant observation. So there are two kinds of observational studies, well, three, but we'll focus on two. And the first kind is called naturalistic observation. Naturalistic observation is just when you go out into the natural world where things are just naturally occurring and participants are simply engaging in behavior. They don't even know they're participants. That's the good part about it. They are not disrupted at all. And we don't need to get consent from the participants if they are acting in the public eye, because they are simply behaving naturally and we can watch them and spy on them all we want to, and it's not a problem. Now, there is a fine line between doing an observational study and invasion of privacy. So you want to make sure that you don't eavesdrop on someone's conversation very closely and carefully at a restaurant, whereas you might want to watch what they're doing or what they choose to order from a distance. So just be aware of that in terms of the ethics that we talked about before. So an example of an observational study that I did in graduate school, we had this funny idea that people who cared about their appearance decided would be more likely to check out the way they looked in a reflective surface. You guys know what I'm talking about, like those buildings you walk past and there's a big mirrored wall or something. Well, we thought that those people might be more vain and therefore would be more likely to look in the mirror. So one of the most important things about observational research of any kind is operationally defining our variables. It's true, it's important no matter what, but particularly in observational studies because they are online, they're happening right there, and we're not sure what we're going to get. And so when we did this mirror study, I'll call it, we thought that people who were well-dressed, because we couldn't really tell how much makeup they were wearing from a distance and whatnot, so we operationally defined care about the way they look as well-dressed. So super snappy dresser. And we went to a mall, and it had this big reflective surface, and then we watched to see if, as we rated, there were 5 of us, and as we rated their appearance based on their dress, and then we looked to make sure that we agreed on how well dressed they were, we would all choose a target person and agree on that person, and surreptitiously, without their awareness, rate them on their concern for appearance, operationally defined as the way they were dressed. Now, I understand that's problematic, and maybe you guys can think of why, but anyway, it was the best that we could do at the time. And so we operationally defined that as well-dressed. We all rated to make sure that we all agreed, and then we tried to determine whether the person looked in the reflective surface or not. The problem was we didn't all agree on whether the person looked. We were graduate students, we weren't perfect yet, and nobody's perfect, but we had not been careful enough in our determination of what it actually meant to look in a reflective mirror. So if you glance like that, does that count? Is that the same as someone stopping and fixing their hair in front of the mirror? What actually counts as a look? What if somebody looks out of the corner of their eye? Does that count? And can we even be sure that they did it? So anyway, we found that dress was related to more likely to look in the reflective surface, but there were so many problems with the study that we couldn't be really sure of anything. It was just an exercise in how to do an observational study, and it's very, very difficult because you really do have to be careful. You have to all agree, everybody be on the same page, choose a target person. And again, these people are not disturbed at all by our behavior. They're not influenced by us in any way or harmed whatsoever. So that's an example of how important it is to operationally define your variables. I learned the hard way because we spent all day doing this, and I was just like, darn, I wish we had agreed more on what counted as a look, and also the problems that maybe we can talk about in class with choosing dress as an indicator of how much your looks matter to you. Okay. So one more thing about the naturalistic observation, it is a really good method for a lot of things. In some cases, there's just no better method than naturalistic observation, because instead of having someone fill out a survey, which is good in its own way, but it's self-report and it's got problems, you're actually seeing them in action. You're watching what they're doing. And so by being able to see the person's behavior, you really get a true measure of it. So if you are interested in, for example, seeing if someone is going to donate to the Salvation Army, the best way to do that is to watch and see if they do it or not. And then you can see if it's related to something else about them, whether they're holding cash or the way they're dressed or if they're with a child or whatever other relationship variables you think might go with that. But the point is that you're watching the behavior take place. Okay, so that's naturalistic observation. You're not interfering, you're simply watching. The second kind that we're going to talk about is participant observation. And this is the one that has a little bit more of an ethical dilemma issue to it. So in this kind of research, the researcher basically becomes a part of a group of interest. So it could be a cult or a gang or any group that you're interested in. And basically become a part of the group, and you have to decide whether you are going to reveal yourself as a researcher and therefore possibly get reactive behavior and influence the way they behave around you, or whether you're going to hide and pretend that you're one of them, basically posing as someone that you're not, and just spy on them secretly. Again, in either case, they're not particularly affected by you. In the first case, you would get consent from them, but in the second case, you wouldn't necessarily get consent, because that would, of course, give everything away. But you should get consent at the end to use the information. So the ethical violations that occur when you become part of a group, I mean, you get a great insider's view. You get to see all the details. You even get to ask questions and maybe even elicit behavior and sort of see what happens if you do certain things. So it gives you an insight as part of the group when they are unaware that you're a researcher that you wouldn't get if they knew you were a researcher. Or if you simply didn't interact with them at all and you watch them from a distance. This is an inside view. You get a much deeper look. And so there are obviously lots of strengths to that. But the biggest weakness, I guess, is besides the ethical issues of lying to people and spying on them, which sounds pretty bad actually now that I think about it, is losing your own perspective, getting immersed in the group. There have been a number of cases where people have gone into like anti-abortion groups, and then they wanted to study them, and then they become really immersed in the group and become invested in their morals and their ideals, and then they start to lose perspective, not only as researchers but as their individual selves, and start to want to become a real part of the group. And so that's kind of interesting, especially with the cults. So it's kind of dangerous in a way for a researcher to do that. You also have to be really careful not to reveal anyone's identity. You're not allowed to do an observational study of any kind when you record personal information. Because remember, we have to protect participants' identities, so we can't write down their license plate numbers and follow them home and see if they're married, like past researchers have done and gotten in trouble for. We can't look at their mail and see who they are, or whatever. We cannot get any identifying information about them. But otherwise, we get to see real behavior online in real time, and we either get to watch it from a distance and not impact it at all, or become a part of it and impact it, but either as a researcher with reactivity, and people may be giving you more information in some ways, but not necessarily acting naturally, or as a deceiver, kind of in there with them thinking that you're part of the group. So anyway, the third kind of observational study that I was going to mention briefly is a lab observational study. And that's when people know they're being observed, they show up to a research lab, there's no experiment going on, but they sit in like a two-way mirror situation and they're videotaped. So they know that they're being watched, but they behave without the researcher being present. And that is another legitimate and valid and pretty typical way that researchers do observation. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful, and next time you guys find yourself people watching, you are actually doing observational research. You just aren't recording and doing data analysis. So I have a question for you and an assignment. It might be hard to read, I'm sorry. What kind of observational study do you think you would do if you had to do one? If you chose to do one for your study that you're planning now. And here's the assignment. I'd like for you to go to a public place and unobtrusively observe. That means do not make yourself known to the people. Do not stand up with a clipboard and stare at them and be real obvious. Unobtrusively observe participant activity involving the variables you operationalized earlier in Module 2 regarding mobile technology. It can be couples at a restaurant, texting other people or each other, using smartphones, or it could be how people walk when they're trying to text or do whatever on their phones. It could be whatever you want that you chose as variables that you thought might be related to one another earlier on in Module 2. So be ready to report on your variables, how you operationally define them, what your prediction or hypothesis was, and finally what you found. It's not a formal presentation, but please do be ready to tell us because we are going to be very interested. All right, I'll see you guys next time for surveys.